knock on the front door was all it took to get 7-year-old Jason out of his room, down the stairs, and stand at the front door to welcome his lovely neighborhood friend Anne. Jason would leave his house early in the morning to go on a walk with Anne. During their walks, they would bring up topics like what happened to them or what they did, but never their feelings because, of course, they were friends. That is what Anne felt, but Jason was holding back. 9 years later, a knock on the door was all it took to get 16-year-old Jason out of his room, down the stairs, and to stand at the front door to welcome his lovely neighborhood friend Anne. During the walk, Jason brought up the idea that him and Anne should go into the same college together after they both finished their last years in high school.
Please proceed to the front lobby.
Anne smiled and giggled with the thought of the idea, followed by a tear. Anne confessed to Jason that she would be moving because her father was assigned to work abroad. Jason questioned Anne how long she would be gone. Anne explained it was a permanent transfer.
Monica Sidorita, Sophia Escario, please proceed to the carport parking area.
Jason was crushed with the news, and Anne could tell. From the friendly smile she normally receives from Jason, it quickly flipped around to a gigantic frown. Anne explained to Jason that they only had 1 week left before the flight. Anne, sympathizing for Jason, gave him a hug before she had left him. Jason, feeling defeated, knew this was his last chance to let Anne know how he really feels. The following day at school, Jason decided to walk straight up to Anne to tell her his feelings. But when a light breeze hits Jason's face, he almost stumbled over. Before Anne noticed Jason, he hesitated with the fear of being rejected. Jason wanted to tell Anne in a very meaningful way where she would be alone. Jason knew Anne was very fond of books. She loved reading them and also writing. Jason knew this was a good way to express himself to Anne. After school, Jason headed towards his house, but he noticed Anne sitting in front of her house. Jason walked up to Anne and sat next to her. Anne rested her head on Jason's shoulder. Jason wanted to talk. He wanted to tell Anne how much he loves her. He wanted to hug her, to kiss her. But it was a moment he just wanted to enjoy. So he just stayed quiet, and so did Anne. They both sat there in their uniforms and just watched the last light of the sun disappear. After it became night, Anne stood up and went back into her house, while Jason did the same. That was a strange moment for Jason. Him and Anne that whole time never spoke a single word. But just by sitting next to her, Jason knew how Anne felt and what troubled her. Jason finally arrived in his room. He tried his best to write the letter, but every time he would start, it would bring him to tears. The thought of Anne leaving made him sad. Jason, laying on his bed, thought about the first time he ever encountered Anne. 5-year-old Jason suddenly heard a knock on the front door. He got out of his room, down the stairs, and stood at the front door to welcome what appears to be a young girl. She was very shy and didn't talk much. The only reason she was at Jason's front door was because her father wanted her to make friends in the neighborhood. Jason invited her to walk. Jason at first was the one who did all the talking, but slowly became curious on who this girl was. Jason gave her a small poke on the shoulder and asked who she was. She seemed like she didn't want to talk much, but she noticed how open this boy was. She herself had to open up as well. Her name was Anne. She explained she did not have a lot of friends. Jason told Anne if she ever needed anything, then she should knock on his door. Anne wanted Jason to make a promise to always answer the front door if she ever knocks. Jason promised. Jason had finished the letter with all of his memories of Anne in it. The following day at school, Jason went to Anne's locker early in the morning and left it inside it. Jason waited for the afternoon before he would approach Anne. When afternoon struck, Jason went to go look for Anne, but when he looked around the school for her, she was nowhere to be found. On his way home, Jason noticed Anne sitting in front of her house, except this time she looked upset. Jason sat next to Anne, and then he invited her to walk with him. While they were walking, Jason could sense discomfort in Anne. She then opened herself to Jason, explaining, it's not right to love her. Jason tried to comfort her, but when he reached for her, she made herself distant. Anne ran back to her house weeping. Jason felt as though he had just ruined an 11-year-long relationship. Jason went to his room to think about what he had done. At night, Jason laid wide awake on his bed, thinking about how he could fix this, especially since tomorrow, 9 a.m., is Anne's flight.
Canisius Carmelo Capili, please proceed to the grand lobby. Your mom and dad are waiting.
Jason's mind slowly started to wander, and after a while, Jason had fallen asleep. Next morning, Jason woke up in a rush. He did not expect to sleep in that day. He looked at his phone. It was already 10:32 a.m. Anne's flight had left an hour ago. Jason just decided to stay in bed the whole day because there was no point getting out of bed. Jason had never hit so low in his life before. He was miserable. The only thing he ever cared about had left him. The only thing he could do was to text Anne an apology, which he did. After a minute, the following message arrived for Jason. Every time I went to your house, I would knock on the front door, and a couple seconds later, you'd show up. You were always there for me even when I didn't want you, and I'm sorry. The times I got mad doesn't equal to the times you were kind. You were the sweetest and the only boy I knew. When I didn't have any friends, you introduced me around. You gave me friends. You gave me happiness. I don't think I can repay you for everything that you have done. You have given more happiness to me in a couple years than any other person can receive in a single lifetime. It's not fair for you to be deprived of what makes you happy. That is why. The message abruptly ends with Jason standing in the middle of his room. Suddenly, there is a knock on the front door. The Knock by Kobe Michael.